All right, folks, and thank you all for coming. My name is Matteo Genovese. For those of you that don't know me, the folks from out of Kingdom. For those of you in the East, you have heard me talk at you a whole bunch. This started as kind of a group roundtable where we can all get together, discuss rules, discuss how we can do things better, and how we can make changes within the East. It is now growing into a way for us to get to know folks from other kingdoms as well. Today, I'm very lucky to have Edward Harbinger, Society, Thrown Weapons, and Archery Marshal with us. Going to ask him a few questions, let him talk to us about himself, the job, and some of the things that happened on a day-to-day and throughout his tenure as Marshal and in his SEA career. I've got a couple of ground rules that I want to cover with everyone first before we kind of get into anything very important. First and foremost, until the interview portion of this ends, please mute your microphones. I promise that the interview portion isn't going to take very long. It's going to be about 5 to 10 minutes. And you're going to have about an hour and a half to, an hour and 45 minutes or so to ask any questions that you have for Edward. We'll also have some things to talk about after we're done talking to Edward about his life. So any subject is completely within limits. Just know that if you do have questions for Edward, that he reserves the right to answer or not answer based on the fact that it will possibly get him fired or, at least cause him a heartache in his position. Also, please wait until you're called on to ask a question. If everybody starts talking and trying to ask a question all at once, it's going to make this really messy and jumbled up. So I promise I'll call on you. If you want to raise your hand to ask a question once the interview portion ends, please do. Also, if you do want to put your question in chat, I may pause during some of the interview questions and ask Edward follow-up questions based on things that you say within the chat. So if you do have something that you want me to follow up on, please put it in chat and I'll ask it there. Otherwise, if you have issues with public speaking and you want to ask a question in chat after the interview portion is over, please do. I want to make sure that everybody gets their voice heard and has a chance to ask Edward anything you want. This is garb and camera optional. If you're not wearing garb, and I see a couple of you aren't, that's great. If you don't want to turn your camera on, also great. Outside of that, any questions about the format before we begin? Fantastic. Edward, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're busy. We all have mundane lives and things like that, and I know you're in a different time zone. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
I'd like to give everybody a chance to kind of hear the things that you and I talked about when we talked about a week and a half ago or so. Can you give everybody here a brief introduction? Tell everybody who you are.
Okay. Well, Baron Edward Harbinger. I've been a Thrown Weapons and Archery Marshal for about the last 15 years here in Ethelmark. I say here in Ethelmark. I'm actually treaty to Ethelmark, but I currently live just over the border in the mid. But I'm a subject of Ethelmark. I was an archery marshal, became a regional marshal, then was the kingdom marshal up until the time where I became the society marshal.
How long have you been society marshal now?
I think this is the third year.
Is there a tenure? Like, is there a set period of time for the position?
Not really. I serve at the discretion of the society Earl Marshal. The last person that Lynette was the last archery and thrown weapons marshal, and she was there for 13 years. So basically, I'll be here until I get tired of it or they ask me to step down.
Over under 10 years?
Probably under 10 years.
All right. That's fair.
It doesn't, I figure after a while, the office takes on the personality of the person in it. And I don't think that's right. I think it needs to grow. And, I don't want it to become Edward's office. it needs to grow and have everybody's personality on it. Um, I don't want it to become jaded, you know.
Yeah. Are there prerequisites for the job? Or I mean, for example, in the East, for us to be the deputy or marshal, there are preferred requirements of being a regional and holding positions like that. Are there requirements for the society job?
I don't know if there's requirements per se. I wrote in a letter of inquiry when the job came open. I put in a letter of intent, and it was one of four. I was told I got it because I was the only non-peer, and that I had recently really shaken up the Ethelmark archery community by. Um, I felt the rules had been neglected for a while, and I rewrote the rule book, and I gave everybody 3 months to retest or lose their warrant because I was tired of people not knowing what the rules were. And the society marshal at that point said, I need somebody like you that's not afraid to shake things up a little bit. So, um, true to my nature, I've kind of done that a little bit since I've been here.
So give the folks here an indication or an idea of what your kind of day to day, month to month is like as the society marshal. Like what goes into the job?
Well, honestly, the job is actually pretty easy. My job as society marshal is to give you a 4-lane highway through the woods. Um, and it's up to each kingdom to decide how much of that 4-lane highway they want to use. If you want to use a bicycle path, that's okay. If you want to use half, 2 lanes, and by that I mean, we just opened it up for plumbata and sling. That doesn't mean that every kingdom has to do that, but it gives you the option to add that if you want to. Um, so when I write rules, I have to write them in the broadest sense, because they're the same rules for Lockhack as they are for the East and the West. And, it's the same set of rules everywhere. And so they're very loose in general. And then each kingdom gets to tighten it up.
Hmm. So talk to me about like how rule changes happen. Like do you just wake up one day and say, Plumbata, that sounds cool, let's do it. Or is there a process that happens?
Well, okay, that's interesting. Up until my tenure as society marshal, the rules had not changed. Um, the previous marshals that were in the position, none of them were throwers. When they were told they needed to make rules for thrown weapons, they took a certain kingdom's policies, struck out the kingdom's name, put society in its place, and rubber stamped those. I'm a thrower. I like to throw things. Um, I've liked it my whole life, and it really infuriated me that on the last set of rule changes, they updated them as no changes, and they only did that because they were instructed by the Earl Marshal that they had to. Um, so, to that end, I know that a couple people in the East were playing with Pumbata. There's some people in Non-Stiara that were starting scoring with it. I know here in Ethelmark, we've been playing with sling for a couple years. It's not real popular, but it's gaining. Um, Due to things that happened in another martial art, um, namely fencing, they had the rapier spears, and they were just calling them long two-handed swords, and people were getting gacked and hurt. They needed to be called spear rapiers, which is why we are no longer calling Plumbata a modified spear. We're not calling sling as in a specialty weapon because it has multiple striking surfaces. We're actually naming what it is. Because if you're going to play with it on a regular basis, the society needs to acknowledge that you are playing with it on a regular basis. Um, the most recent thing is I was looking through the rules and realized that spears for a hard target, we're at a 20-foot minimum. It seems a little far for me, and so I put it out there of reducing that range. I think 15 is fine, but I'm willing, I don't want to arbitrarily change things. I like to discuss it and, convince me. Is it good? Is it bad? Um, I know what I want to do, but I'm not going to just do it. I'm willing to listen to anybody's arguments. As far as additional weapons forms, we have moved into what heavy weapons and fencing do with experimental weapons. If you have a weapon that you can document the period and you want to play with it, then there's a process. You write up a proposal, you give it to your kingdom marshal. Your kingdom marshal will give it to your kingdom earl marshal, who will send it to the society earl marshal, who will run it past me, and we'll set up an experimental program. And it'll run for a length of time with reporting dates and whatnot. And then we'll make a decision from there as to whether we incorporate it into a regular thrown weapons regime, which again, individual kingdoms can choose or not choose, but then it's allowable. Like, I know there's interest in staff sling and Yorkshire arrow and, other weapons that are period. And I'm not above throwing any of those. I love to throw things, but we're going to go forward like we're a legitimate martial art, just like all the rest of them. Because if we want to get treated like not the redhead stepchild, then we got to act like not the redhead stepchild.
So talk to me about that process, though. Like, how did the process of putting Plumbata in the rule books take place?
Okay, well, they had already Anstior had been playing with them. I know a certain individual in the East had been playing with them, and so I reached out to people that had more experience than me, and I talked to them, and Colin and Dee Dee were kind enough to give me a couple to play with so I could feel out on my own, what's safe, what's not safe. And we wrote up a proposal because there's another kingdom that had already set up, Anstior had already set up a scoring program. So these are the last two that are going to get in without an experimental process because they had kind of grandfathered in. They've already been being used for years. Going forward, we're going to use the experimental process that all the other martial arts do. But, basically, I conferred with other people. We made up a set of pretty standard safety rules, and we went from there. I made a proposal. I sent it. I write up the rules. I send them to the Earl Marshal. He looks at them. They present them to the bod. It goes to the omnibudsman, however you say that. They discuss it. If they have questions, they come back and ask, fine tune it, and then the bod either passes them or not, and then they get incorporated.
Perfect. Thank you. That helps a lot.
Okay.
So Plumbata, approved, slings approved. You got these wonderful experimental weapons. What's your favorite thrown weapon?
I am really partial to chakrams and machetes. I like throwing the unusual stuff. It's, my wife and I, we throw army shovels and all kinds of fun stuff, forks and, rotary cutters. And I have, shirkins and hair spikes and railroad spikes and rubber chickens with a bayonet shoved up their butt, all the fun stuff. I like to just throw stuff and make it stick,
I tried getting good at throwing screws. I wanted to learn how to throw a screw so that it would screw into the board. And I got it a few times, but I can't get it enough to be consistent. And it drives me nuts. That's my one, I wish I had. Pizza cutters are also fun.
Yes.
But I want to get a screw where I can throw it kind of like a football and have it screw into the board.
Then you need a screwdriver.
Right.
I also like meat cleavers. They're fun.
Meat cleavers are good. All right. So, President of the United States every year gets in front of the country and gives us the State of the Union, right? Like he lays out his plan. He lays out where we are as a country. I want to give you, as kind of our de facto president of Thrown Weapons, a chance to give us your state of Thrown Weapons at the moment.
Well, I think the state of thrown weapons is good. I would love to see more unity among the kingdoms, and there have been a couple people that are trying to unify scoring system, which at the society level I don't have an opinion on. I can't because we don't acknowledge scoring. Um, we don't acknowledge it in archery either. So,
Can we
but,
pause there for a second? Can you give the folks here on the call a why to that? Because that's kind of important.
well, the scoring system for like royal rounds, which are, you know, honestly, they're not mentioned in thrown weapons or archery, because they were invented by Sir John of the West as a way for archers and throwers to compare themselves across the kingdoms. It's outside of the SCA. Um, we don't care how you compare yourselves. We care that you do it safely. Again, it's the 4-lane highway. I know, like in the mid, their thrown weapons are thrown at a square target. Um, I've never run into a square tree, but maybe they found Minecraftville. I don't know.
Hey,
um,
I throw at walls, so
well, and it's funny because I live here and I was like talking to them. I says, well, you guys don't even have the square route or square target. And they're like, oh, we never throw at that. We throw Twix. It's like, well, why don't you write that out then? Make it a whole lot easier for everybody. But, you know, again, I don't have an opinion on scoring. Um, I think it's wonderful that the kingdoms are trying to unify it, because it's one of the things that brought archery together. Is you can go anywhere in the known world and shoot a royal round, and it's at 20, 30, and 40, and the scoring values are the same. You can't say that for thrown weapons because in some kingdoms it's 10 foot, some it's 15.
I think we're getting closer. I think we're getting closer.
Well,
The discussion needs to ramp up again, but like
yeah,
you said, mid realm could care less about theirs. Others that have weird ones don't care as much, except for one which has something that involves 60 throws. It's like on tier, it has something that's like 60 throws, and it's like, whoa.
yeah, and I would love to see it get a little more unified. You know, it's going to lead into that whole question of a omnibus, and you know,
you're stealing my thunder, Edward.
I'm not trying to. It kind of leads into that. I'm going to let you ask that question, but I would love to see, State of the Union wise, I would love to see a little more work happen towards unifying. Um, you know, you don't have to let in everything, but what you do let in, let it be the same as everybody else's, so that we can, I can go from Ohio to Connecticut to Virginia and throw, and it's all the same. I'm not, I like an Ethel mark. Your foot has to be on the line. It can't be totally over the line. So if my heel is touching it, it's a good throw. In other kingdoms, if your toe goes over the line, it's a foul. I would love to see that standardized, you know.
Are
But
you actively working towards something like that, or is that something that you leave to the kingdoms to work out on their own?
I have to leave that to the kingdoms because that all comes back to scoring, and it's not a safety issue whether your foot goes over the line or not. Um, it's I can't have an opinion on scoring because then I would have to say that we actually do scoring, and then at the society level we don't do scoring at all.
Yeah. So you kind of stole a little bit of my thunder a minute ago, but the when the census came out not too long ago, people seemed to have a strong feeling towards the additional martial efforts having some form of a peerage. Now, I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, do you think that they should or shouldn't? But you and I had a nice and interesting conversation about what you think a thrown weapons or an archery peer looks like.
Yes.
Can you share with the group what you thought that was?
Well, I think archery or thrown weapons here would be not necessarily the hottest, bow or hottest knife, but be decent at it, be courteous, be someone you can look up to, not afraid to teach you, has some knowledge of the history of it and different aspects of how it was used in medieval times. Because otherwise, we're just throwing things to throw things. And, we're a historical recreation society. And so if you don't know how they used it in period, like, the fact that the Franks used the franchette and won France from the Gauls, then we're kind of losing our thunder on that. That's excellent teaching opportunities. And if we're not teaching people, then we're, to me, a peer is not self-serving. They're of service to everyone.
Mhm.
And they're a little knowledgeable about everything. I mean, I'm not a great fencer, but I've tried it. I've tried everything but heavy weapons, and the only reason I didn't do that was because I didn't want to have my hips blown out again and go through another 10 years of surgeries. But other than that, I've tried, I do some arts. I've been of service. I've even tried poetry. Not good at it, but I've tried it. To me, a peer tries everything and inspires others to do the same. And as far as another additional peerage goes, we've already got a model. We've got the laurels, and just because you're a pottery laurel doesn't make you knowledgeable about leather carving, but you recognize skills when you see them, and you recognize someone who's knowledgeable about what they're doing. And so you can base that on that. Are they courteous? Do they like to show, will they answer your questions? Will they try to inspire you to want to do this on your own? And do other people that do that look up to them and or do they just look on them and go, yeah, he's a schmuck? There's peers and you can recognize them from a mile away, whether you do that or not. So.
Does prowess have equal weight to that, or would you prefer to see someone knowledgeable, kind of at a 60-40 to prowess, or 50-50, something like that?
I would prefer a 60-40, honestly. I mean, prowess definitely is an asset, but it's not the end all because I've seen a lot of really hot bowmen that were total jerks, and I would never look up to them as a peer. The same with throwers that are really good. They can, they can crowd a bullseye with 10 knives, but they're self-conceited and I would never look up to them, and it's not someone who shows anybody how to do it. They're just, yeah, watch this, boom, boom, boom. And, that to me isn't a peer, and I would never want to see them represent a group like that. Like I said, I'm not the greatest, but, I'm not afraid to teach somebody. And to me, the greatest compliment is having someone get better than me. It shows that I did my job and I inspired them. So,
I think that is as good a response as I could hope for our final question. I think that there's been a couple of posts in the chat. Mikhail asked, couldn't stepping over a 10-foot line be a safety issue? When we were discussing the rules questions or the scoring questions.
Well, okay. Like I said, in this kingdom, you can step on the line as long as your foot's on the line. We're talking 10 inches, 12 if you got a really big foot. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't consider those 10 inches to be detrimental.
Totally fair. I have a personal opinion on that I will share later. But ultimately, it comes down to it's a martial discipline, and we'll move on from there. DD put in there that many professional throwers use 7-foot or 9-foot distances. The axe throwing tournaments you see on TV and that sort of thing throw from a much closer distance. And now we'll open it up to the group for questions. Edward, thank you very much for kind of sitting through this and working through the process with me. You're the first one. You're my guinea pig. This was painless for me. I hope it was for you as well.
Oh, no, I've enjoyed myself.
And I really appreciate your time and your candor, frankly, because we don't know each other very well, but you've been very open to answering the questions that I've had. I'm hopeful that the folks here on the line have a lot of really good questions for you. And if not, we'll talk about some other stuff.
Okay, yeah, I hope to, though. Give me your questions.
As a reminder, please raise your hand. I'll point you out. You guys can unmute and then go from there. All right, Cedric. I know you've been waiting.
You knew I'd have questions.
Yeah, I do.
I'm just curious. Do you have any other weapons currently in the pipeline, or are we?
I just got a request for an experimental form for a Yorkshire dart. It's also called a Swiss dart. It's called by several different names.
The Japanese have them.
We'll see how far. I don't have a problem with it. It's got to go through all the channels to get back to me to do that.
What is it? What does it look like?
It looks like about 3/4 of an arrow with a notch or a groove cut in it, and you put a string on it. You throw it like an atlatl. Okay, it's got a range of about 25 foot.
I think, isn't this also called like a Swedish arrow or something like that?
Yes, exactly. Like I said, it goes by several different names. Dutch arrow. So we'll see. They need to do their paperwork and get it all, and we'll set up a experimental weapons program for it.
Quick follow-up to that. Does the SCA or is the SCA responsible for researching state guidelines or even federal guidelines for weapons to see if they are legal to transport or use?
No, we are not. That's up to each individual kingdom again. I can tell you that when I took this office, they were talking about doing target siege. And there is a program being set up for that out west. We haven't gotten to a point of writing rules for it yet. It could be very interesting. Could also be extremely dangerous. And I don't know exactly where you would set it up. You'd need a lot of room because they're talking full-size siege engines. But we're only limited by our imaginations and the safety that we can incorporate into it. So
that makes sense. Thank you. Mikhail, you had a question?
Yeah, sort of piggybacking on the last question, actually. Before you listed a whole bunch of weapons that you call into the sort of the fun category, fun things to throw that are basically outside of, aren't your normal knife, spear, axe, and plumbata, sling, which are now in society rules. How do we determine, or is there a way to determine if something that falls outside of those 5 categories is still allowable, or should we, go through? I've seen things that are suddenly getting called knives that are anywhere from machetes that are practically swords to basically things that are just like a piece of steel that's got something of a point at the front.
Well, I understand that, and the problem would be that we never actually defined what is a knife. Is it a pen knife? Is it a bayonet? Is it a machete? Where do we draw the line between a machete and a sword, or a knife and a sword? We never define that, and until someone asks me to, I'm not ready to do that, because then we're limiting the fun. Right now, a hair spike or a railroad spike would fall under a knife category. It's got a single scoring point. A chakram would fall under specialty weapons because it's got multiple striking surfaces. So We can shoehorn in anything, but unless we're going to use it on a regular basis, we don't need to define it per se. And it's like I said, machetes, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a knife on steroids.
All right, how about a butcher's cleaver? It looks like an axe, but it's called a knife. But that's like I said, that's kind of the exceptions that kind of pop up.
It's kind of a tomato. It depends on how heavy of a cleaver it is. If it's an old style cast iron meat cleaver, it's almost as thick as an axe. If it's a modern Chinese cleaver, well, we never defined what an axe is either.
Exactly. Okay. So basically, if we can shoehorn it into one of the categories, it's basically allowable by society rules until we decide that we're getting too far off of trying to stretch.
Like I said, if you want to do it on a regular basis and incorporate it into a scoring system, like they wanted to incorporate scoring into Blue Mata, that's what sparked that. Sling is different enough from everything else that we do that we felt we needed to define it. But everything else, I like going to everything but the kitchen sink tournaments. I don't know how I can fit a shovel in there, but I'll figure out a way.
It sort of has more than one scoring yet, so it's
All right, Diala.
Along those lines, what my interpretation has always been, and partly because I guess I read into or overread or misread the everything else category, seeing that it was only for the multiple blades or multiple edges. Basically anything that I didn't consider a knife, axe, or spear, I've always put into the anything else that your marshal is comfortable with on your range. And it gets down to, still, as far as I'm concerned, a cleaver would be an axe. It's got a long blade. It's not a single scoring thing. But that's my interpretation. And leaving things like that up to the marshals, unless a kingdom wants to say, this, and get very picky about things, which I don't think any kingdom wants to, is it better to let people shoehorn things like cleavers into one or both of the two categories? Or do we want to rewrite the everything else category to take in anything that isn't obviously... I would never consider a spike to be a knife. But I mean, that was one thing that I've been wanting to send off to you when I first when you first took over and were rewriting the rules, was should that anything else be reevaluated to be anything that's not obviously one of the five?
Well,
I mean, a chicken is a chicken. It's not a knife.
well, technically, a chicken's a bayonet.
Right, which is...
we're not talking the outside covering. What's the meat and potatoes of it? It's a bayonet, which is basically a knife. So I know, and I can only speak for Ethelmark because I've read other people's rules too. But in Ethelmark, a knife is defined as having a sharpened tip and dulled edges. Okay, which would necessitate a railroad spike being a knife because you have a sharpened tip.
Then a cleaver would not qualify as a knife by that definition.
It would qualify as an axe. So, I like the multiple scoring bit. I mean, it makes it a little difficult. You have to open up your interpretations to be able to throw anything. But then again, how often do we do that? Okay. I mean, I don't bring an army shovel to throw at every practice. I usually bring it as a novelty. Most people will go, oh, let me try that once. Okay, I'm done. If we're having an everything but the kitchen sink tournament, then it's a specialty thing. It's a one-off. And you can bend the rules. It's up to Marshal's interpretation whether it's safe to throw or not. We are only defining what things are when we're going to use them all the time.
Just to be picky, I would rename your tournament everything, including the kitchen sink, because people have thrown those too.
Okay, we haven't done that here yet.
You take one of these, chemistry type ones that have a nice little lip on them with an edge, and people have thrown those.
Okay.
So it's everything, including the kitchen sink.
Okay.
Cedric, I know you have another question hiding in there somewhere. You're just being polite.
I didn't realize I had to put my hand down. So
It's fair, but the floor is yours if you have another question.
no, I was taking that in and was kind of just rolling with it. So no, you guys keep asking good questions because, getting back to Edward's point earlier, the unity, presenting a unified presence across the SCA, I think this kind of helps develop that.
Trying everything.
Okay, I'm probably going to speak a little off record here, but as far as the omnibus peerage, which, by the way, I am personally in favor of as a society marshal, I have no opinion. But one of the things I can tell you that the BOD will look at is if we're looking to incorporate other martial arts, one of the things we have to do is take them into considerations when we have those meetings. And I say this because the first time I attended an omnibus meeting up on the Thrown Weapons field, it was on a Friday, the same Friday that the archery marshals hold their main meeting every single year at Penzing. The archery community is nothing to sneeze at. They're the ones that started the whole omnibus thing. If you're writing them off as their marshals meeting and champions tryouts are happening, we're already shooting ourselves in the foot.
I thought we scheduled it for after their meeting because we had a bunch of people show up we had a bunch of archers show up after their meeting, at the conclusion of their meeting. I was part of the organization of that meeting.
I showed up, and I think one other did, but that was because we did. The last time I checked, I had a talk with Cameron DeGray about it, is we're going to do this. We need to take each other into consideration and make sure that, the Thrown Weapons marshals aren't having their meeting at the same time that we want to have an omnibus meeting because, we're cutting out a section of ourselves and the archers. And, we got to, if we want to be a peerage, we have to actually look out for each other because it's a group thing, That's all. I mean, one of the things I notice is that we get so involved with our little niche, or I'm a thrower, or I'm an archer, or I'm a fencer, that we don't pay attention to the other groups that could contribute to that. And if we're going to be an omnibus with everybody, we got to look out for everybody and include them all in so that we can all do this together because that's the only way the BOD's going to take it serious. One of the other things that, I try to get the marshals to report to me is the number of marshals and the number of throwers and shooters at each practice. Individual, I was talking to Matt about this. Sir Johannes from Atlantia, it runs a scoring system, the SCA scores pages. What I came up with was when I was Archer General, I would have the marshals mark down a 1 for anybody who attended the practice and shot. Didn't matter if they scored, didn't matter if they wanted to keep it or not, didn't matter if they were even shooting royal rounds. Everybody gets a score of 1. That shows that it was a unique individual at that practice. Now, I know under the Deputy Earl Marshal's tools for each kingdom, you can go into that page and look, and it will show you unique shooters or unique throwers for that quarter. That's the number I need to show because we don't have authorizations. And that's what the BOD looks at. We have, 1,100 authorized fencers, and we have 12,000 authorized fighters. We don't have authorized archers or authorized throwers. But if we can show them unique numbers of unique throwers from each kingdom, that's going to show them how many people that they're neglecting by not having a path of peerage for these people. You know, it's all about a numbers game. And, you know, I can get people to report those numbers. I can report them. And then they're going to look and say, oh my gosh, we have a lot of people that do this. Maybe we should think about this. You know?
And Mikhail, this was something as part of the conversation that I was having with Edward that I kind of wanted to run by you, where we as practice holders, scorekeepers, send you anybody who shows up that even throws and attempts to throw for score, give them a 1. It doesn't necessarily have to go on their royal round average, but it's a way for you to track who's showing up and who's making the attempt. And that way we have a better way of tracking. We also have the sign-in sheets. So if we need to go in a different direction, we can, it exists, but it's something that might have a built-in way for like an easy way to pull that up online in some way, shape, or form for you.
Can you read my facial expression on that one?
Yeah.
It is extra work for you. Totally
Yeah,
understand that.
I would have to keep it as a separate database, separate from the Royal Round database, because we do have people who submit scores of 0s and 1s that occasionally come through. So if we're going to give everybody a 1, that throws off the scoring.
I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt anything, though, right? Like a 1 doesn't put them up in a different metric. A 1 is just a number. It's a bottom number.
It was something I would still want to keep separate.
Okay.
Especially if we ever get to splitting the weapons forms. So we have a ranking for knives, a ranking for axes, a ranking for spears. Do we give them a 1 for each? Do we get, that kind of thing. I would think in the East, we may want to rewrite the reporting form, though, for the way that Edward was just talking about it. We basically go and say how many people attend each practice, but we may want to go through and say something like, over the past 6 months, how many different people have attended your practice, and phrase it that way to get a better counting system. Because if it's the same 5 people who show up every single week, all right, you report 5. But if you're getting different people showing up to each practice, try to keep them running. Each marshal can keep a running count of how many different people they've had.
It is why I bounced that idea off you, because I knew you'd have a better one. Thank you.
Yeah, I tried something along those lines for ours for a while, and I was getting people at least sending me things, but I never got a chance to coordinate them all together to get the unique names. It was for they were supposed to be sending it for practices and events. But yeah, it's a lot of work to go through that, especially when people's handwriting isn't all that neat on the sign-in sheets.
Or they put in different names when they go to different groups. So you got to try to figure out, okay, is this person actually this person? Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of why I went to the Johannes' scoring system. Is because
Yantis.
Okay. Once you're entered into that system, it doesn't matter if I'm a prolific shooter. I'll go to 4 different practices a week, 5 different, and they'll be all over. But I'm still the same person in the database. So I'm not counted 5 times for that week. I'm only counted once. You know, I'm only one unique shooter for that quarter, as opposed to I went to 5.